settlement would go a long way in preventing the loss of lives. But the question I want to ask today, Honorable Deputy Speaker, is this. When the people in Palestine are losing their lives, being raped and murdered, there's no cry from anybody, no passion. When the same thing happens in Syria, we hear nothing. When the same thing happens in Libya, we hear nothing. When the same thing happens in Iraq, we hear nothing. When the Ukrainians are violating the rights of other Ukrainians, particularly in the Donbass region, there's nobody crying for those people. What is the reason for that? What about India? Why is there nobody in this country raising the concerns of the Indian minorities, of the Christians and the Muslims whose rights are being violated by the Indian government? Nobody in this country is saying anything about it. Now, NATO went on and bombed many of the Russian allies. Russia could do absolutely nothing about it and stayed out of it. What did Russia say? Demilitarization. Stay away from my Russian borders. If you notice what has been happening since 1990, they are coming closer and closer and closer to the Russian border until they will make Russia so weak that Russia will have no other option but to give in to them. That is what it is all about. But who is the root cause of this whole problem? It is clearly the West and the United States of America that is the root cause of all the mayhem and chaos and destruction all over the world. Let's talk about the biological laboratories which is funded by the Pentagon in Ukraine. Where is it coming from? Why are they getting involved in those? Let's talk about the number of people that were massacred by the Ukrainians who have been detained without trial. Nobody has said anything about that as well. Okay, let's talk about the shelling of the hospitals and the schools and the massacre and the mass graves that were found in Ukraine. Nobody says anything about that. Now, what is Russia asking for? Russia is saying, stay away from my borders and stay away from me. All you have been doing, and remember, Ukraine is being used as a fool by the United States and the West, and they're falling into the trap like many other countries have fallen in the trap previously, and that's what it is all about. Currently, there is a threat to the Russian Republic as a result of them coming closer to the Russian borders, the eastern side. All Russia is saying, stay away. Do not collude with the West, because the West, we all know, have a hidden agenda. What is their agenda? To want to wipe Russia off the map as well. That is what it is all about. Now we come here and we look at one side of the story. We don't want to give an objective view. Yes, indeed, it is not good to take sides. I agree with whoever said that. But that is what we are doing here. We are forgetting about those people whose rights are being violated by the Ukrainians themselves. Why does the Ukrainians do not comply with the agreement that they've entered into? Exactly what Israel has done, that has violated every agreement that they've entered into. What about the Minsk agreement that they've entered into? What about the agreement in 1990? Why have they continuously been violating those agreements? So let us look at this in an open mind. What is really going on in Russia, Ukraine? We would agree that yes, indeed, that we need to mediate and find a peaceful solution. But you cannot find a peaceful solution when Ukraine has been running away when they've been negotiating a peaceful settlement. They've done it again and again. So that is exactly what it is all about. The National Freedom Party views this in a very serious light. Particularly, I've heard many people talking about wheat. It's time to grow your own wheat. We've got very fertile soil in this country. We don't need to rely on other countries. But the important thing is this. Let us be objective. Let us be objective when we discuss an issue that affects us in this country, even though it is in the foreign soil. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Honorable Masipa.
We will never forgive NATO for the killing of brother leader Muammar Gaddafi, and we'll never forget that this war alliance of NATO destroyed Libya, which was one of the very few economically sovereign countries in the African continent. Now, South Africa's relationship with the Russian Federation is rooted in true bonds of libertarian brotherhood. At the core of the Soviet Union was the Russian Federation, and anyone who argues otherwise is being dishonest. The USSR and Russia in particular dedicated military, political, and ideological resources in the struggle against colonialism and apartheid in South Africa. After the Sharpeville massacre on 21st of March 1960, the Soviet Union was among the first to cut all diplomatic relations with apartheid South Africa. It was essentially the Soviet Union working with the Cuban and Vietnam forces that provided military assistance in the Battle of Quito, the apartheid criminals to negotiate transition in South Africa. The Soviet Union and Russian Federation are not peacetime friends of South Africa, but true friends who must never be abandoned, irrespective of imperialist-sponsored master narratives about the military operations in Ukraine, which are essentially and emphatically aimed at preventing imperialist military expansion in Eastern Europe. South Africa is a member of the BRICS bloc of emerging economies, which essentially gives South Africa's economy access to a market of more than 3 billion people in the world and to more than 32% of the world economy. Our country must never distance itself from BRICS in favor of the erstwhile colonial and neo-colonial masters whose interests are ruthless exploitation of our natural resources. South Africa must not cut its economic relations with the Russian Federation and must instead deepen, broaden, and strengthen our economic, social, and political relations with the Russian Federation, and of course with all BRIC countries. The Russian Federation, like all BRIC countries of Brazil, China, and India, have no colonial and they've got no neo-colonial aspirations, but are instead committed to global peace, stability, and collective prosperity. In the immediate, the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, SAPRA, must authorize Sputnik V vaccines, and all other relationships must be strengthened so that we have got access to Sputnik V vaccines here in South Africa. And all parts of the progressive world must treat the West isolation of Russia as an opportunity to transition to a new world as an European imperialism and colonialism. Now, in terms of the background, Chairperson, is that the outcomes of the Second World War was, one, the formation of the United Nations, but the colonial masters led by the US and the UK started a war alliance. NATO is a war alliance which is trying to expand its military bases towards Eastern Europe. The United States of America has currently more than 79 of those are in the African continent, including in Ghana, where we have the Africa Command Center. So there is absolutely nothing wrong with the military operations that are taking place in Ukraine to prevent the expansion of NATO, because we know of their sins and what they have done to destroy many parts of the world of overthrowing governments. We stand as the EFF to reaffirm that the relationship that has been built through blood and common purpose against colonialism and apartheid must be strengthened through properly defined and deepened economic relationships. We must never fall victim to NATO alliance as a peaceful alliance and any other person or any other national territory as a criminal alliance. We stand as the EFF to reaffirm that our relationship with Russia must never be discontinued. We should, on the contrary, strengthen that relationship because it is based on common prosperity and anti-imperialism. Thank you very much.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah. Honorable Sengwa.
Honorable members, the world finds itself yet again on the brink of economic collapse.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker, honourable members. The world is facing its biggest threat of war in over 80 years. A tyrannical aggressor with a finger on a nuclear button has invaded a far less powerful neighbour and is shelling civilian targets as we speak. Over 2 million Ukrainians have become overnight refugees as their homes and their hospitals have been bombed to rubble. President Vladimir Putin is acting with the impunity of a despot with nothing to lose. Let us be very clear. There is no moral ambiguity here. Regardless of the political history of the region or decades of tension between East and West, Russia has committed an unjustifiable act of war. Every world leader with a moral conscience has condemned it and called on Russia to withdraw, but not South Africa's President Ramaphosa. Under a shameful veneer of neutrality, the ANC government has effectively pledged its tacit support for Putin's imperial march to restore his lost empire. And I'm not only talking about the shameful abstention in the United Nations vote. When ANC ministers attend a cocktail function glorifying the might of the Russian army on the very day of the invasion, you don't have to read between the lines. When a lone call from Durko for Russia to withdraw its troops is hastily retracted and the minister admonished, you don't have to read between the lines. And when our president calls Putin between the middle of his invasion, pledging to strengthen bilateral support for him while the rest of the world isolates him, you don't have to read between the lines. To the astonishment of the world, the very same ANC that relied on global solidarity to fight oppression has now openly sided with the oppressor. It has picked the wrong side of history, and it has dragged 60 million South Africans along with it. And why? Is it because Russia once supported South Africa's liberation struggle? But that wasn't Russia. It was the Soviet Union. And that solidarity included Ukraine, the very country being attacked. This was also a long time ago. And at what stage does Russia's recent actions cancel out that historical goodwill? Is it then because it's in our country's economic interests? And I can show you it's not that either. Russia is only our 38th largest trading partner, accounting for around 0.5% of our exports and our imports. That's less than 1.4% of our trade with NATO countries. And yet we shun our own economic partners in favor of a global pariah. But if it's not in South Africa's interests, then whose interests is it in? And to answer that, you only need to look at Russia's expansion into Africa through its so-called elite capture, where pliable leaders are ensnared in long-term patronage schemes. 15 African countries currently have Russian-financed nuclear deals, and many more locked into Russian security contracts. Also consider that a businessman close to Putin tried to run a disinformation campaign in the 2019 election to favor the ANC, and that the ANC's largest donor last year was a Putin-backed oligarch. When you connect these dots, the full picture of why the ANC's support for Russia starts to emerge. Now, there are some who say that this is not our war to become involved in, but that is simply not true. We may be 9,000 kilometers away, but we will soon feel its effect in every single aspect of South African life. When the oil price skyrockets through to 30 to 40 rand, as it's been predicted, this will be our war too. When diesel becomes so expensive that Eskom can no longer burn its turbines, and when the lights go out, they stay out, this will be our war too. When the spiraling cost of importing and transporting food is passed on to consumers who already struggle to make ends meet and feed their families, and we see a large increase in malnutrition, this will be our war too. And when all of this food and insecurity and inflation results in a breakdown of law and order that will make last year's July riots look like child play, this will be our war too. We are already involved, and there is no such thing as a neutral position. As the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu famously said, when you choose the side of the oppressor in situations of, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. Countries that choose the wrong side of history will live with this tag for generations to come. It shouldn't be the hard thing to do, to put country ahead of party and to do the right thing. Honourable members, the ANC does not speak for South Africa on this, and it certainly doesn't speak for the DA. We condemn Russia's illegal invasion in the strongest terms, and we stand firmly with the people of Ukraine. And I urge President Ramaphosa to rethink the position of his government. Think of the plight of the Ukraine. Think of South Africa's place in the world, and think about what this war is going to mean for all of us as South Africans. Choose peace, condemn Russia. Thank you.
The line.
Geachte adjunct speaker, there must be no doubt that each and every person in South Africa is affected by the war in Ukraine. The subject for discussion this day is what is the economic influence and effect in South Africa in terms of the war in the Ukraine. And why do I say that each and every person is affected by that? It is because you have to eat to live. If you go and look what the statistics reveal, we will find and see that 30% of the wheat consumption in South Africa is imported from the Ukraine. That means, and that is the projection, that since 24th of January, if you project it over a year to year, wheat prices will increase with 27%. White maize will increase with 20%. Yellow maize with 21%. That is then no wonder that certain bakeries already announced that there will be a sharp increase in the price of bread because of the war in the Ukraine. And to get to a situation where you think that it doesn't influence you as a citizen or as a person in South Africa because it's far away, then you are misleading yourself. And then I didn't even talk about the influence of fuel prices, the agricultural sector, fertilizers. So in the next season, where farmers are preparing for wheat to plant, they're going to pay a dear price because of this war in Ukraine. And then, Honourable Deputy Speaker, I want to say to the ANC that if you think that just because of the support in your struggle days that you have to look and be in favor of your friend, I want to say to you, you are failing the people of South Africa. A true friend will appreciate sharp criticism if they deserve it. And I think the ANC must ask itself, in the fact that they don't want to condemn in strong terms the war in the Ukraine, the fact that they did not support the resolution of the United Nations, how does Russia see you? Do they see you as a friend or as a useful idiot? That is the fact. En ek wil dit baie duidelik stel. Daar moet geen onduidelikheid wees nie. As 'n land sy tanks en sy troepe instuur in 'n ander land, dan is jy die aggressor. Maak nie saak wat se argumente jy wil gebruik om te sê dat jy dit gedoen het nie. Daar is geen regverdiging nie. En daarom sê die Vryheidsfront Plus dat die inval van Rusland in die Oekraïne moet ten sterkste veroordeel word. And I said it before, the real victims of war are the women and the children. And we see that. I thank you.
Point of order, Speaker.
Yes, what's the point of order?
Kalewanda Day. The ACDP was one of the first parties that called on Russia to withdraw their forces from Ukraine so that dialogue, negotiations, and diplomacy can take place free from violence. Russia's invasion of Ukraine we are debating today is very unfortunate and should not have happened. The stubbornness of political leaders who negotiate in bad faith has resulted in what potentially might descend into Third World War, given that Russia has reportedly requested military and technical assistance from China, while the US, on the other hand, has warned China of serious consequences if she gives assistance to Russia. This is a clear indication that the Russia-Ukraine conflict is not an easy matter that can be resolved by just condemning one side against the other. King Solomon once said, and I quote, "The first one to plead his case seems right until another comes and cross-examines him," close quote. This simply means that we must listen to both sides of the story in any conflict before we pass judgment, which would be skewed and might even exonerate the guilty party. The ACDP does not agree with President Ramaphosa's approach to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. According to media reports, President Ramaphosa has discussed the conflict with Russian President Vladimir Putin, but has not discussed the same conflict with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The ACDP would like to know why President Ramaphosa is not calling President Zelensky just as he called President Putin. He should prevail on both leaders to allow mediation process to end this conflict that is affecting South Africa's economy directly. What affects Ukraine affects Europe, Africa, and the rest of the world. The economies of emerging markets like South Africa are badly hit hard. Rolling blackouts, the legacy of COVID lockdowns, corruption, and poor service delivery have put South Africa in a worse financial position than the one we faced during the global meltdown of 2008. Investor chief economist is also concerned and is saying that the war between Russia and Ukraine, coupled with continued load shedding and the slow implementation of structural reforms, could cause South Africa's economic growth 0.2% this year. Honorable members, the ACDP repeats its call on Russia and Ukraine to allow peaceful mediation to take place, because we are affected negatively by this war. We want peace and not war. And I call on our members to allow both sides and encourage both sides to meet and negotiate rather than stand on grandstands and condemn one against the other.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Greetings to our Chief Whip, ministers who are present here, honorable members. After the democratic election in 1994, South Africa ceased to be the parade of the world. It regained its rightful place in Africa, in the United Nations, and in the family of nations. We emerged as a democratic country into a fundamental transformed world. The development of South Africa's post-apartheid foreign policy is guided by the 7 principles, which are a belief in human rights which extend beyond the political, embracing the economy, social and environmental issues, a belief that just and lasting solution to the problem of humankind can only come through the promotion of democracy worldwide, a belief that justice and international law should guide the relations between the nations, a belief that international peace in the goal to which all nations should strive, where this breakdown, internationally agreed peace mechanism to solve conflict should be resorted to. A belief that our foreign policy should reflect the interests of the continent of Africa. a belief that South African economic development depend on growing regions and international economic cooperation in an independent world, a belief that our foreign relations must mirror our deep commitment, the consolidation of democratic South Africa. Deputy Speaker, South Africa's approach on the Russian-Ukraine matters has been based on the following key principle, which in turn are based on the foreign policy, to expressing deep concern at the violation of the UN Charter and international law, the loss of life, the humanitarian impact, and the forced displacement of people as a result of war in Ukraine. Recognizing the armed conflict would no doubt result in human suffering and destruction, the effect of which will not only affect Ukraine, but also reverberate across the world. No country is immune to the effect of this conflict. As the UN Secretary General has indicated, the conflict will have a huge impact on the global economy in a moment when we are emerging from COVID-19 pandemic, and so many developing countries absolutely need to have space for recovery. South Africa emphasizes respect to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. On the 9th of September 2021, BRICS leaders have expressed concern at the continuing conflict and violence in the different parts of the world. The BRICS leaders reaffirmed their commitment to the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of states and reiterated that all conflicts must be resolved by peace means and through political and diplomatic effort in line with the international law, that is the UN Charter. Deputy Speaker, as a nation built through negotiation, South Africa is always appreciative of the potential dialogue has in averting a crisis and de-escalating conflict. In line with our strong commitment to the peace resolution of conflict, South Africa urges all parties to devote increased effort to diplomacy and to find a solution that will help avert further escalation. The door of diplomacy should never be closed even as conflict has broken out. South Africa urges all parties to approach the situation in a spirit of compromise, with all sides respecting international law. Peaceful resolution of the matters can
on a point of order. Deputy Speaker,
Honorable members, the order. Can you please not do that? You are interrupting the speaker.
Yes.
It is irresponsible and it's not okay. Please finish your remarks, madam.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Speaker. South Africa urges all parties to approach the situation in a spirit of compromise, with all sides respecting international law. Peaceful resolution of matter can be achieved by all parties if diplomatic effort to find a solution to the concern raised expressed by Russia resume. Currently, it is critical for all parties to uphold and protect human rights and abide by their obligation in terms of international law and international humanitarian law. South Africa continues to support and encourage regional initiatives such as the Minsk Agreement, and we welcome the work of the Normandy format, the Trilateral Contact Group, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. South Africa supports the involvement of the good offices of the UN Secretary General, as it could also make a positive contribution in finding a lasting solution to this conflict. In the search of peace, South Africa supports the resolution process of inclusive talk led by the United Nations Security Council to address all the issues of concern to any of these parties. Deputy Speaker, noting that international action must create an environment conducive for diplomacy, dialogue, and mediation. Greater attention must be paid to bringing the sides closer to dialogue and not to take them further apart. The international community should support engagement between the parties in a spirit of compromise while de-escalating tensions, committing them to the cessation of hostilities and building trust and confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, members of parliament, as government of South Africa, we urge all South Africans not to take side on the conflict between Russia and Ukraine.